Good evening, everyone. Greg Bolden here, America Emboldened. We got the Chris Michaels Show. Chris Michaels coming right up in a second. Tonight on America Emboldened, we have a story from deep inside the heart of Washington, D.C. That's right. For 20 years, our guest tonight for interview night, Lisa Ekman, she lived and breathed the machinery of power down there. She worked for Democratic senators, government agencies, nonprofit organizations. She's a respected lobbyist and a disability advocate fighting to expand federal programs at the time, and she believed in that mission. She believed in this system. However, the world locked down in 2020, and that belief seemed to crack, like it did for many of us. What she saw in the government response, censorship, blind conformity, it made her ask a dangerous question. Had she become part of something she no longer recognized? So tonight, Lisa Ekman is going to join us to tell her story, how a loyal insider became a dissenter, how a lobbyist turned truth seeker, and how she walked away from the DC swamp to a quiet farm in Virginia. That sounds nice. I wish I was there, actually. She calls it deprogramming. Others might call it an awakening. Either way, her journey exposes something far larger about power, about control, and the courage it takes to think for yourself. Tonight, this conversation, it's not a partisan conversation. It's a human one. It's about conscience. It's about belief. And it's about freedom in an age of information warfare. So come join Chris Michaels and Lisa Ekman tonight as we talk about deprogramming the Democrats. Welcome, Chris. Welcome, Lisa. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation tonight.
Looking forward to it as well. Chris, how have you been?
I've been pretty good. Been all up with the election in New York City, people with the hand wringing going on, and I'm just telling them it's ridiculous. Stop it. But this is stereotypical of the Democrat Party and the way the left likes to throw red meat to their party faithful.
I am so glad that Mamdani won the election. I don't think you guys understand what this actually means. This actually would be a moment where I can't wait to ask Lisa about this tonight. But I think this is a moment where the left is going to get exposed, that they're no longer the moderate Democrats that they claim to be, and they really have moved far left, many of them, calling for socialism and calling for a fallacy of feel-goodness when really those policies don't actually equal individual sovereign stations of the individual. So I'm really curious about how this could all fall apart. That my downside about this, Michaels and Lisa, is if Mamdani's policies don't have an immediate negative impact, people may not realize that they're actually just being drawn in wolves in sheep clothing. And 5 years from now, 6 years from now, the economic impact gets felt. And all of a sudden people go, wait a minute, how did this happen? And we'll go back to the show and say, well, we should have deprogrammed some Democrats. So Lisa, how are you tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I think, it's going to be interesting to see how that does actually play out in New York. It may take a little while for it all to kind of fall apart. And I think part of the strategy of the Democrats has been to slowly get people more and more dependent on the government without them realizing that that's what's happening. And I unfortunately see that this may be an opportunity for that to happen just a little bit more. But it also depends on how faithful he is to the promises that he made before the election, because we all know politicians, no matter who they are, promise a lot of things that never happen. So I know, how dare I say, and that isn't Democrat or Republican. That's just the nature of the beast, I think. But so it depends on how much he actually does of what he said he was going to do. Rent control, and I think he already backed off the free grocery stores to maybe cheaper grocery stores now. But I think it's so, like I say, it depends. But I also think that it also depends a lot on what happens with his tax proposals and how many people who have already threatened that they're going to leave if he won, who are the ones the cash cows, so to speak, that he's planning to milk even more than New York already does, and how many of those millionaires and billionaires are going to say, I've had enough. So I think I think it's an interesting thing because one of the things I always talk about is that we never have real conversations about any of the programs that we've passed. So we've had welfare for how long, and how has it helped
20s.
people? Right? Has it actually helped people? Do we see people getting better? Well, no. What we see is more and more people being dependent on the system, and if that's the goal, then they've been wildly successful,
Yeah, I,
actually.
I I actually say, Lisa, oftentimes, being a public school teacher, I work with a population that's high in poverty. And, we have free breakfast, free lunch. And I'm so glad that we have those things because that would be, for many of these students, the only meal they get for the day. And that's not an exaggeration. So I'm not anti social programs when it comes to ways that really help people. The problem is some of these social programs that we've put in place, specifically in certain cities, we've actually almost made people so reliant on those programs that there's no way for them to get up and help themselves. And the lobbying from corporate in order to make it sound like, oh, well, we're doing great things for the city, they're actually relying on those same programs for those same individuals in order to continue to have cash come in. I'm not sure if you saw any of the stories, what's going on in the cities with SNAP benefits right now, but you might have food deserts right now in Philadelphia because their grocery stores are down 60%. And so, what happens when the average grocer can no longer afford to pay their workers and keep the stores open because those specific stores relied on SNAP benefits, while the grocers out in the suburbs were maybe at 20% and can survive what's going on right now? So, I'm curious, in your time in DC as a lobbyist, working with senators and doing things, tell me a little bit about what you saw that you thought was improving human quality of life, but you see different now that you've kind of taken the lobbyist blindfold off, so to speak. Not saying you had a blindfold, but your talking points.
I did. If you look at the cover of my book, there's blinders on the donkey. That's the way I looked at it. Yeah, it is interesting because I really bought into the system. I bought into the fact that government could do good and government could make people's lives better. So, I primarily focused on advocating on even as a lobbyist for people with disabilities. So I was trying to grow the programs and make them bigger. But I think one of the things that I had blinders on about was the actual level of fraud that does occur because we had to argue it was very, very low, extremely low. But what I also think that some of these programs do is mask the problems that we really need to address as a society. So, for example, when President Clinton was in and we in the White House and we started globalization and we started shipping jobs overseas and factories overseas, we failed to have a conversation about what are we going to do for the people who used to rely on those kind of jobs in order to be middle class. What are we replacing it with? And we really didn't, as a society, have that conversation. And people would snarkily say to people living in what they now call flyover country, oh, learn to code. And now I think we're facing a similar situation with AI is going to put all the coders out of work, as well as probably everybody, most everybody else. And we're failing to have a conversation other than to say, oh, just becoming completely dependent on the government. We'll have I think Elon Musk was talking about a high universal income, and nobody will have to do anything, and we'll all just it'll all be great. But that doesn't really make any sense to me, and we're not having that conversation. So I think that was a part of what I think I really was blinded to, is that I thought we were improving things, but often when we put these programs into place, what they really do is keep us from having real conversations about the actual problems that are underlying the issue that we're trying to address. So that was one thing. I think also, this changed over time, and I did kind of see it while I was there, but I see it so clearly in retrospect. Is the way in which our um, dialogue changed across the aisle. When I first got to Washington, D.C., senators would have dinner with members of the opposite party all the time. There were like a cappella singing groups with Republican and Democratic senators who would sing, and they actually had relationships outside of sound bites and fighting in front of the camera or on the internet. And I slowly saw that change, and I think that change was reflected throughout the country, where you saw people becoming much more tribal and much more unable to have conversations with one another. So when I first was working in the Senate in 2001 on detail from a federal agency, I felt like the meetings I was in, we were actually having real conversations where everybody's opinion got heard, and we were trying to come to compromises that would benefit the country. Even though nobody ever gets what they want in a compromise. So everybody would leave a little bit upset, but everybody got something. And people were in good faith engaging in these conversations. But by the time I retired in 2020 from that work, I didn't see that at all anymore. What I saw was often, yeah, you have a really good policy argument there, but politically that's going to play terribly, so we're not going to do it. Or we can't let the other side get a win here. So I think we're seeing this kind of with the government shutdown somewhat right now. And that is, it's a lot of it is political. A lot of it is also just that's the only leverage they think they have to do some things, the Democrats. But I think that was the other thing I saw. And I think, in looking back, I think that really started that increased division based on two factors. One being social media being a huge part of it, because people got in their echo chambers and every negative stereotype got reinforced, and they just kept, they literally, people started living in two completely different realities. I think that's part of the challenge that we face in uniting our country, is that we really do live in different realities. But the second thing was, President Obama, I think, I think really stoked division in many, many ways in the country. And I saw a real change, especially into his second term, where we really started to see people getting very tribal almost about their politics. The other thing that social media did, and this 24-hour news cycle and information at your fingertips, is just make people much more political in general. And people stop like hanging out with people who don't think like they do. And so, I mean, I don't think we used to know if you were on the bowling league or you went to the church. You didn't necessarily know who people voted for. You just knew they brought the greatest, salad to the church picnic or whatever. And now everybody wears their politics on their sleeve in a very different way that makes it sometimes hard to just talk to people and get to know them. So I think that is, and I was blinded to all of that because I was just about as tribal as you could be, that before I woke up.
I completely understand that. Do you think one of the reasons why people have become so tribal is the lack of faith that we currently have in society? I mean, it's almost as if you remove faith, then you've got to replace it with something. So that's where we get the monikers of trusting the science and never questioning anybody in a seat of power. Dr. Fauci comes to mind. So do you think this is part of a larger agenda where they are trying to replace the traditional form of faith with a subservience to authority and government?
100% I do. And that is, you're speaking about why I called it deprogramming, and why I believe that the left has been taken over into a cult-like, religious-like faith in government. And the way that I usually phrase it, Chris, is that they worship authority and they idolize the expert. And we saw that during COVID. We saw people comply in a way that 20, 30 years ago, I never would have thought Americans would comply the way that they did during COVID, to absolutely ridiculous things that are clearly not science. I mean, it's not science to say you got to wear your mask to walk into a restaurant, but once you're seated, you can take it off. That's not science. What is that? That is complying with authority in a way that uh, it removes any thinking. It's a complete. It's 100% faith in if someone has the education and the credentials, they are not to be questioned. That's part of what our indoctrination or education system does in a lot of ways in this country now. And the higher up you go, I have a law degree, I have a master's in social work, I spent a lot of time in school, and people who question teacher don't do very well. And when you're in institutions of higher learning, and 90% of your professors are Democrats, and I would say probably more than half of those radical leftists who believe in critical theory and deconstruction of our country and the institutions therein, you end up with people who are going to comply, not ask questions. And I think the other thing that's really important to think about is when when you remove someone's faith in the creator, when they don't have any religious faith, it's a lot easier to use fear to control them. There is a level of peace and serenity and acceptance that people who do have faith have, which makes it much harder to use fear to control them. And starting, if you go back to 9/11, if you go back to identity politics, and I talk about this a lot in the book because I think it's a really important piece for how we got where we were on the left. Fear, it's constant fear. It's constant fear that you're going to, that this is why you see trans activists say there's a trans genocide, because they've made them so afraid. This is why people were willing to turn their neighbors in during COVID for going for a walk in the middle of the night. This is a true story. I know someone that was telling me this happened to them, and called the police because they're not an essential worker. So fear is a huge piece of it. And I think that people need connection, right? And they
Yeah.
want to be connected to something bigger than themselves. And if it's not God, then there's government. And I think it has been a concerted effort to do that.
I honestly think that looking at the trends that we've seen over the past 8 years in particular, I think there is a concerted effort to have the state be the custodian of the children and to remove parental rights.
Well, and Michaels, we talked about local hospitals, and I'm not sure if you've seen this in Virginia, Lisa, but feel free to fill us in on what you've read or seen. A local hospital, children's hospital here in Delaware, their board of directors, they made it so a child at the age of 12, they remove the parents so they can talk to the kid about their gender identity. They can talk to the kid about their mental health without the parents being in the room. And they give a summary statement of treatment of care, but they don't actually now find that it's legally necessary at the age of 12 to detail what was talked about in the room. You have school districts all across this country that are putting in policies that you can't share certain information with the families for, violating a kid's trust, that they may not have told their parents certain things, depending on which school district you're in. I mean, we're in a time where parents are losing their autonomy and losing their right to parent, especially for those between the ages of 12 and 17 before they turn 18. I think that's a dangerous thing. But when you say this, you're seen as, you get labeled by the left. You get labeled as somebody who is a hateful person against people that are going through this. Meanwhile, you're sitting there being like, there's nothing hateful whatsoever. If you call out something that is counterintuitive towards equal rights, you might be labeled a racist by the left. So I'm curious with the current barometer, so to speak, of the Democrats. And I don't say this as Democrats in the traditional sense of Democrats. I really say the leftist. In the leftist side of the arguments where everything is Trump's fault and everything is, if you're in the center, you're actually a right wing crazy. How do you begin conversations to talk some common sense on these issues with protecting children, with trying to help people understand? Like, what have you come to a conclusion wise?
Well, let me back up before I answer that just a second, because I do want to say that I think you've hit a nail on the head. One of the conclusions I came to while researching for the book was that we have been slow walking towards a cultural revolution towards communism. And one of the main things that there are two things you have to destroy. And Chris, you hit on it. First one is faith, and the second one is the family. Because these are the two institutions that can prevent people from letting the government take complete control. And so I think you've seen that concerted effort, and it's straight out of the playbook of Mao in China. And the other piece that we see that with that is the chaos in the cities. Mao had his Red Guard, and we have Antifa, and we have Black Lives Matter, and we have all of the chaos that is coming in the city. So I just wanted to mention that, because I think it's very purposeful to take away they're trying to raise kids who put their faith in the state instead of in their families. And you hit directly on that. So I think, how do you start a conversation? Well, I think the first thing is that I provide as guidance is, don't try to tell them anything, because you're not going to get through, especially if your facts are countering their facts, then you're not going to get through to them, because they will only listen to the experts that are part of the cult, so to speak. And the technique that I have found that works is asking questions. The Socratic method works, but it's a really tricky one, because these questions cannot presume an answer, and they can't have facts in them. So in this instance, if you're talking about gender ideology, I mean, part of what the challenge is that they come from an assumption that anybody who doesn't think exactly like they do doesn't care about that child. And so these are questions that you have to think of. How can you ask a question with what you know about that particular individual that does a few things? It shows them that you care about them. Because one of the things I found with people on the left, especially women on the left, is that they need external validation for their own self-identity. And this goes back to what Chris was asking about faith. I think when you have faith, you don't need external validation from the in crowd the same way. So, but they need the external validation. So by asking a question about what they believe and what they think, you're validating them in the first place, that they matter, that you value what they have to say. One of the things that I would say, to someone maybe about gender ideology is, okay, so I understand, that you really care about this kid. So can you tell me what studies you looked at in order to tell? Because I'm really interested to learn more about this topic. The truth is, there aren't studies, and I outline all of this in the book. There just aren't studies that say that affirming or whatever it is you want to do with a child actually improves mental health. I think it also ties back to what we're talking about. Kids who are growing up today lack social connections. They lack parents. But a lot are raised by single parents. A lot are also parents have to work all the time because of the economic reality in this country. So they don't get the sort of the support and things they need from their families. So they're looking for it somewhere else, and they often find a community that gives that to them through the gender ideology. So but they also, many of them also suffer from other mental health concerns, which get completely ignored because of the fact that they focus in on this one piece. And so all the studies that I found actually showed mental health is worse, especially after surgery, because the person keeps believing that it's all going to get better, and it never does. And so, but back to
Yeah.
the original point. Oh, go ahead.
Just to kind of, because I know people are going to attack your point and your assertion, so I want to give some background on that. There are studies that would show that it's successful. However, if you look at those studies, they're small sample sizes, there's lack of randomized controls throughout them, and there's self-reporting biases. And so you'll actually find more studies that show that it's not as helpful, especially in what Lisa just mentioned. And so this is one of those areas where if you are somebody who considers themselves a little bit more as a leftist on this, and you just had a guttural response at what Lisa said, pause for a moment and think about, okay, well, what are the studies that you have? What's the sample size? And what I just stated, does that match the data that you have? Because I've looked at all the studies on both sides, and I can tell you what Lisa said. When you do a surgery, especially on somebody who's young, it gets catastrophic within a short amount of time. Continue on, Lisa. I just want to make sure I cover things so people aren't like, well, why didn't you address that?
And 100%. And in my book, I outline exactly what you just did. And I reference a particular study, I believe it was in Sweden, that looks up to 10 years post-operative, and the outcomes are really bad at that point for people. So that's where I would start is talking that way and asking them some of what I found for people when they are really what I would say programmed or indoctrinated on the left is that it's really hard for them to go beneath the talking points. It's really hard for them to get into depth. And so asking them to support their position beneath the talking points is often a way that you can do it. And again, the other thing that I would really counsel is do it with love, kindness, and patience, because that is not, you're not going to get them to open up by attacking them, and that's not the point. I think the point of what we want is for people to be able to have real conversations again, to be able to talk without names being called or without those kind of things, and to get to a place where we're not feeling like we're morally superior because we're on one side or the other. And to look at each other as humans again, and to rehumanize people who are quote unquote on the other side, whatever that means to you. So in that instance, so what are the studies you relied on? And then I would say, what do you know about who has developed the standard of care for trans youth or trans people? And then the answer to that is WPATH. And then what do you know about WPATH? And then encourage them to go learn more about WPATH's history. I think it can be illuminating. So that's sort of where you would start, and it all depends on what their answers are. Sometimes you're going to get to a point where the isms or the phobias will start coming out back at you, or they may accuse you of being racist or transphobic or those kind of things. But I think it's important. I believe that I lived in a complete delusion that reality, as I said, we're living in different realities, and my reality was not real. I believed what the mainstream media told me. I believed what, for example, when the Bureau of Labor Statistics issued an employment number, I believed it was real. And then they would come back a month later and they would revise those numbers, but continue to use the first one, which is a sleight of hand. But I was living, if I had not been awake during the Biden administration, I would have thought that Biden did a great job creating jobs, which was actually not true when you look at the revised numbers. And so I lived in a delusion. And the thing about that delusion is that your subconscious knows that you're living in a delusion, I believe. And when someone gets close to making your conscious mind know it, the subconscious lashes out. It's like the reptilian survival brain takes over. And that is when you get the you're a racist, you're a homophobic, or whatever it is. They need to say that used to shut people down. And I think what we know now is more and more people are willing to take that sling or arrow of the name calling in order to have truth in the conversation. So I don't know if that gets enough at your question, but that is really how I would do it. And I think it because what happens is what happened to me, and so I've extrapolated to people on the left, and in my experience is that they don't allow themselves to ask questions, and they really don't allow themselves to think below the talking points. And so what you're really trying to do is get them thinking again. And if you can get them to go look for those studies, then you've actually broken through. If you can get them to ask a question about what the dogma is, and what I call it, there's sort of a requirement for ideological conformity now on the left. You can't really stray from the idea that we have to give gender affirming care to every child who wants it, or that every woman should be able to have an abortion up to the time of birth, or that all immigration is good, regardless legal or not. You can't stray from those things, or you get called the names and you might get canceled or doxxed or whatever the latest thing that they're doing in that regard is. So
Yeah, what you're describing to me sounds like programming. I mean, you reference it, but I mean, people may take that as tongue in cheek and as hyperbole to get your point across. But what Greg and I have seen, especially during COVID, and what you're describing sounds like MK Ultra. Sounds like there's some kind of intelligence operation behind this whole thing. And you reference in your book that Operation Mockingbird, which was when all of these intelligence agencies like the CIA inserted their narratives and essentially their contractors and operatives within the mainstream media to generate a narrative. That's alive and well. And it's still continuing to this day. And Greg and I have spoken about this over the past couple of years with the influencer movement.
Global Engagement Center with Biden.
Yes. When you see somebody just shoot up out of nowhere that starts from 3 followers and gets 700,000 followers within a month, pretty sure that is some kind of intelligence op. So what are we really looking at here? Are we looking at a compromised government agency that has run amok and that has run rogue, essentially? Is this permeating throughout all of the agencies? And who are they targeting? Because you also referenced how the way that they are portraying the victim, it almost seems like they're targeting women, right? To have that that empathy, that sympathy towards the victim.
I would say that they in general they're targeting everybody, but I think there are reasons why the techniques they use are more effective on women, and especially on women who, like myself, who did not have children, and I can explain why that's the case. So, what they've done, most people on the left are very compassionate people, right? And they, even though it doesn't seem like it right now, it doesn't seem like they're very kind or compassionate as they're screaming at you and calling for people's death or celebrating
yes,
them.
Right. Some people may get confused by the rhetoric.
But yes, because what has happened is that they've taken it and they've given them selective compassion. So they've programmed them to only be compassionate towards certain groups who are vulnerable or are historically oppressed, and we've seen that happen. And then what they do is they manipulate that compassion using fear, and they weaponize it into anger. And I believe that women, and I may have to give up my feminist card for saying what I'm about to say, but I think I I already turned it in, so that's okay. No, women who are very nurturing, right? They have the nurturing instinct. And when they don't have children of their own, that nurturing has to go somewhere. And so they have programmed them to put that nurturing into certain groups. And that's why I think in part it works better on women than on men. Um, I also think that, you know, I think faith also plays a role in this again, because of the fact that, and I'm not saying, I actually don't recall the women versus men faith numbers, but I think more younger men are returning to the church than younger women are. So I think that plays
Orthodox
into
in
it.
particular, I think too. Orthodox Christianity more than anything else, which I think that's kind of stunning. You know.
I agree, but I think that that the further that the women are being pushed away from that kind of faith, the easier they are to get them to have faith in the government, and to that's why they are a little bit more susceptible susceptible to the programming.
And the reason why I bring this up is because I wanted to just briefly show the exit polling for Ma'am Danny with based upon gender. Can you see that? Look at this one in particular. Women 18 to 29, 84% of women polled in that age group voted for Ma'am Danny. That is a stunning number. And then you can go up higher. Women 30 to 44, 65% of them voted for Ma'am Danny. And it's also on the male side, but it's at a younger age group. Men, same thing. 18 to 29, you had roughly 68% of men vote for Ma'am Danny too. So I just thought that was very interesting that you brought up that potentially women are more susceptible to this kind of programming than men. And here we are, 84%. That's a stunning number. I mean, that's crazy.
I think the other thing that plays into that, and I'm gonna probably blank on the numbers, but maybe they'll come to me by the time I get there. Women are getting educated in much higher numbers, percentages now than men,
Mm.
and it's programming through uh, television, movies, and mainstream media, but it is also indoctrination in these colleges and universities that plays a role. And so, you know, women are, again, yeah, it didn't come to me, but I have all the stats in the book.
Yeah,
But
right.
basically, it's like 100. There, especially graduate level education, women are outpacing men significantly, and
Right.
so I think that's part of it.
And also, I would dare say that microaggressions, you bring that up in your book too.
I
They are
do.
bombarded with microaggressions. What is this? I mean, I'm 40 something years old. I mean,
Well,
what's a microaggression?
not just that, but the social media algorithms at this point in time villainize men. Commercials villainize men. When you watch the way that males are portrayed, specifically over the last 15 years in media, it's completely anti-men. Everything is, well, men are evil towards women. Screw the patriarchy, and ignoring the fact of what men have actually done for society by being the prototypical male, as far as, trying to earn the income, provide for the family, going back to that typical 1950s, 1960s style of man. We have completely degenderified what it means to be a man. So even when you talk to like the average 18 to 29-year-old now, I actually find the conversations to be quite frustrating, because we've almost taught people to be too much in their feelings. We've taught people that empathy is more important than your individual sovereign state of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We've lost the foundation that you have a creator. We lost the foundation that there is natural law that derives for ethics and morality in this country. So if you have stripped people, the individuals, through media, through algorithms, and you've convinced people that this sex is bad. They've oppressed everybody for so long. And this side here is going to win the day with their feelings and with empathy. And meanwhile, there's no such thing as actual morals because everything's fallen into moral relativism. Well, you've deconstructed all of society at that point in time, and you don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to saying that you support the Constitution anymore either, because all of the people that were signing the Constitution believed that you had rights that were inherent simply by birthright, and the Constitution protected those rights. But when you ask an 18 to like 33-year-old now, they're kind of like, oh, no, no, no. The Constitution gives you those rights. Bullcrap. The Constitution gives no rights. It protects the rights. And it also states in the Constitution that it is not a complete list of the rights that you're guaranteed to have protected by the government, that, you know, should they have missed something, by all means, that's protected too. And I don't understand why more people don't understand the Constitution outside of the fact that it's willful ignorance or it's the programming. And so I would imagine, as somebody with a law degree that went and studied all this, that this has to be very frustrating to you as well, to see the deconstruction of law and a reinterpretation of law through feelings over facts and sentiment based upon what the country was founded on.
It 100% is. I think it is also, they've really changed what they teach in high school. I don't know what age you teach, but I find people, I think that newly naturalized citizens know more about our government than our own young people. And, you know, in particular to me, there were 3 amendments in the Bill of Rights that were fundamental to making America what it was and the unique place it has in the history of civilizations. The first, the second, and the fourth. Most people born after 9/11 don't even know what the Fourth Amendment is. They have absolutely no idea what it was. And anyone who, you know, grew up with a smartphone in their hand really doesn't understand why anyone would care about privacy. The whole point of social media was to get people used to airing everything out in the public square. And if you want the public square to see, you can't really care what the government sees, right? So I think that it is very frustrating to me. And, you know, one of the things that I often, you know, freedom of speech and the censorship was part of what helped me have an awakening. You know, when I heard the term disinformation used by my government against its own citizens, it sent a shiver down my spine almost literally, because that doesn't happen in our constitutional republic. Free speech is hard. It's the freedom of speech is and the First Amendment protection of it is not there for when it's easy. It's there for when it's hard. It's there for when you need to hold government to account, which is what people were trying to do during COVID. And so I find that I have to ask people sometimes when I'm having these conversations, what does freedom mean to you? And sometimes the answer is absolutely appalling. Sometimes there's no answer. Sometimes, and then, you know, I'll ask, well, is it important to you? And they really have indoctrinated young people away from the individual rights-based republic to believe in collectivism. And you cannot have both. You can't. It's not possible. So I think we face a challenge in rectifying that.
Well, I get in trouble all the time because I tell people very bluntly, and here's the problem: people don't have conversation with nuance. I am big. Anyone that knows me, follows my work, knows I am going to write until all the nuance is out. I'm going to speak till the nuance is out. And if you would like to question me on something, you better come with that nuance as well, because I'll say things like LGBTQ have no rights. It's human rights. Every individual has rights. Like my HOA, you know, if all of a sudden they say, hey, 51% of them go, we don't want Greg Bolden to own his house anymore. That's not allowed. We live in a republic. We don't live in a democracy. A democracy, it's not about how people feel. and the fact that a majority rules in order to take your house or your property or your rights away. No, no, no. We all have rights. And so I always use the argument back to people, can you please tell me a right that you have or don't have based upon how you identify? And that's the whole identity politics, right? Like, there's no such thing as rights within an identity or a group, a collective. The Constitution is very clear on all of that, but for some reason, people want to circumvent that. And that conversation gets me in trouble all the time, but I'm here for it any time of day. So feel free, if you hear me this show and you want to talk more about it, let's have that conversation, because I will hope to educate you a little bit more on why I have been studied that over the course of my life and how I can articulate that for you.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, is things are nuanced, and also that, one of the things that I have found is that there really is no principle and that people on the left base their positions on. And that's why we've gotten to the ends justify the means sort of situation that we're in. I think, I've done quite a bit of study of the Constitution and the founding, and I actually have many of the Federalist Papers on my bookshelf in our library. Our founders were afraid of both the tyranny of the majority and the tyranny of the minority. And they built things into our Constitution to protect against both of those things. A lot of people who are fairly educated in our Constitution don't even remember the fact that senators used to be appointed by state legislatures until it was the 17th Amendment. And there was a reason for that. And I think we've lost a lot of the whole idea of actual federalism and a weak federal government and states being laboratories of innovation and states having the ability to have different policies. In my mind, if you wanted to have a collectivist idea, do it at your state level, instead of trying to force it on 340 million people. And I think, that is something maybe I don't think we were, I want to be careful how I say this. I'm not arguing we should dissolve our union, just to make sure people are clear. What I am trying to say is that it's often hard to imagine that you could have a federal policy that people in the blue parts of California and people in the red parts of Georgia would all agree to. And when you try to make federal policy that is so inconsistent with individual rights and liberties, that spans such a large country, it becomes really, really challenging. Even if people do understand what individual freedom and liberty are supposed to mean.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with all that, though, is I think it's Article 4 of the Constitution would say that the law of the federal Constitution is the law of the land. A state cannot strip you of a rights. The state cannot violate your constitutional rights simply because the state has its own constitution. The federal government always comes first. That's how federalism works in this country. And I feel like your argument when you see like what California is doing, or my own state of Delaware, where Democratic Socialists are being elected at record numbers, we're seeing where people are kind of like, hey, you know what, California, you go off and do your own thing. But that's not good for any of us. If we are passing laws and we have a court system and judges that are going to politicize it, like Pennsylvania recently, everybody's celebrating the fact, oh, we held on to a Democrat Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. That's a problem. The courts are not supposed to have a bias of let's swing in with Republicans and Democrats. I'm curious how you feel about what's happened to the Supreme Court, both at the federal level as well as what we're seeing in the states. As somebody who's practicing or has practiced law, you're retired now, but you have the law degree. So how do you feel about that?
So I want to be clear. I wasn't suggesting that any state should be able to do unconstitutional things in collectivism. What I was saying is, if you want to tax your people
So,
more, to give more benefits. Go
yes,
do
Lisa,
that.
I apologize. I wasn't trying to get that. What my point is, right now, collective laws are being passed that are violating the Second Amendment rights with Moms Demand Action, special lobbyist groups taking gun rights away from people, which is spelled out very easily in most state constitutions as well as federal. And so when you get these collectivist movements that lobbyists are funding, it's very dangerous. And so I'm glad you said that. I wasn't trying to imply that you were stating that. So thank you
Okay.
for clarifying that.
No problem. Yeah. So I am very, very concerned about the politicization of our courts. I think that it, no matter what now, unless we see some kind of reform, people are going to make the argument that it's a political prosecution or it's a political witch hunt. And I think it gets to the fact that we have the people do not trust the institutions in our country anymore. And I think in many ways that's justified. It's hard to, for example, trust the CDC and the FDA after what we saw during COVID and NIH. So, but with the courts, it's especially quite dangerous, I think. I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this, but a judge just ruled that President Trump has to give out all SNAP benefits just today for November. And I don't want to see anyone starve. I don't want to see that at all. But I do not believe that based on the Judiciary Act of, I'm blanking on the year, that creates the federal courts, that one district court judge has the authority to tell the president that he has to do something for um, an entire program when the recipients of that are not before the court. And this was happening with all sorts of different challenges to President Trump's actions. And basically, these nationwide injunctions or the requirement that he fund federal programs. And I guess what it gets to is that there are rules for the court and judges don't follow them. People have stopped looking at courts, as you say, as nonpartisan entities that are neutral and fair arbiters of the Constitution and the law. Sadly, I think that we have had a deterioration in that status of the federal Supreme Court ever since Bush v. Gore in 2000, especially. I wish I could provide an answer that I think would work easily to reverse this trend. I think when we have a Congress that is so ineffective and so, I think purposely so in some ways, really can't accomplish anything. I mean, we can't fund our government. Why do we have a shutdown threat pretty much every year? September 30th always comes on September 30th. We know this. And so it's broken on purpose, I think, in many ways. So that institution doesn't work. Our courts now, people don't believe in. And I guess if you were trying to deconstruct this system and build a new one, that's an effective way to maybe get people willing to want to see big changes in the structure and function of the government. So I am very concerned about that. I think that I think the other thing that we see is now on the Supreme Court, justices who were educated after the indoctrination really started to take hold in our law schools. I went to Georgetown, and I only had one professor that I would have considered to be conservative in his legal philosophy. All the rest of them were very liberal. That was one of my favorite classes that I had because it was actually co-taught, one liberal, one conservative. And I actually got to hear real debate, and real discussion around constitutional law, which was fascinating to me, even though I never really practiced in that area. But I think that the indoctrination that we see with 90% of professors being on the left, we're also seeing that sort of infiltrating the courts now as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's permeating throughout all of society, of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, all kinds of intelligence agencies too. And we're, as far as I'm concerned, in a very, very dangerous spot, especially with the advent of artificial intelligence. Because thanks to the big, beautiful bill, we've got what? We've got artificial intelligence being installed throughout the federal government and its agencies, and nobody can touch it for a decade. That's it. You can't touch it. And when you've got Peter Thiel at the helm, I do have some concerns. So we have a major, major problem here of everybody being completely programmed, basically from birth until they start to contribute in society in some way after getting a higher education. And what do we do about it? How do we deprogram people?
Well, I wish I had like a textbook or a playbook I could
You
give
do.
you.
It's your book.
Well, it is.
It's the end. It's how to deprogram people.
Well, it is, and we talked about it. It's unfortunately a person by person exercise. The thing that's really important to remember is everybody was programmed in different ways. Right. Everybody was indoctrinated differently, and everybody has their issue that they care about more than anything else, right? And so you have to get at that issue with each person, and the more you know someone, the better you can help them through asking these questions. And again, it's with one of the things that I think is really hard for many of us is to have patience with people who are programmed. They come across as very morally superior, they come across as angry, they come across as elitist, and having the patience, and again, as I said before, it's love, kindness, and patience, and it's asking questions, and you're not going to logic them out of programming. You're not going to fact check them out of programming. You have to re-engage their brain in a safe way for them, and that's where you have to go. And there are more examples in the book of how to do it, but it is a very individualized exercise. And I think we're facing a lot of challenges with AI as well. When you were talking about influencers and accounts that just skyrocket, I am not sure how many people I talk to on social media are actually people anymore. I'm not really sure at all. And I'm becoming less and less able to spot a deep fake, to spot an AI created anything, especially the shorter it is, the harder it is. I recently saw this little test someone had put together, and it was just basically people doing simple tasks, stirring a bowl of cake batter or something. I could not identify the AI versus real.
Wow.
And so I should say I got one right out of 10. Yeah. So as that continues to happen, I think one of the things I talk about in the book is how political correctness started to try to control our language, and then to control reality, with the actual end goal of destroying anyone's ability to know what's real unless the government tells them. And as we're adding AI into the picture, I think that becomes more and more challenging in terms of helping people to have a common reality, essentially. And when you don't have a common reality, it's almost impossible to have reasoned discussion about the state of the world. So
there was also a little blurb that came out a couple of weeks ago that ChatGPT and Grok, they're reducing the amount of language and words that they use in their responses. I mean, this by default limits people's ability to express themselves because they just don't know how. I mean, this is 1984 stuff.
But did you see what happened to ChatGPT yesterday at the
No.
end of the day? So ChatGPT, OpenAI, just announced that they will no longer allow their platform to give medical advice because it is illegal to practice medicine without being a doctor.
Of course.
And I chuckled because I'm going, there's two things. One, maybe this is a win for humanity in some respects because it shows that if you band together with enough money, you can change AI, because I'm pretty sure the medical community has banded together on this one. But the downside of this, I also chuckled in grief of, you know what? Differential diagnosis is so much stronger with AI than it is with your local doctor. Because quite honestly, AI has a wealth of information that can see what's going on. And this is actually bad for the common person. So once again, we say to the individual, don't worry, your doctor can save you. Somebody else can save your problem. Don't research yourself. You're not a doctor. And this goes back to the 2020 thing. I did, Lisa, I did an experiment about 3 weeks ago on social media. I wrote an article about AI and what's going on. I posted this video right here of myself on the sideline at one of our high school games. And here it goes. I'll play it for you. Boom. I had people contact my family to ask if I was okay after this. People believe that that was a real video. I made that with AI.
Yeah, and it's only getting better, you know. I mean, I saw I don't know what's going to happen to music and movies and all of that very soon. So, you know, I think we face some challenges, and all of this comes back to me, to a few things, and that is remembering we're all humans. We all come from the same place, and that I, for one, am a humanist. I am not a transhumanist. And I think that we're facing a battle here between people like Peter Thiel, who is a complete transhumanist, and who others like him. And we need to keep reminding ourselves of our humanity. And one of the things that I encourage in the book, and I encourage everyone I meet to do, is to unplug more often, get out in nature, reconnect to the beauty that the Creator gave us here on this wonderful planet, and reconnect in person with actual people, especially people who you might disagree with. You know, where are people actually meeting other people IRL? You know, where do they do that anymore? People, there's no. I used to be in a bowling league many years ago. Do people have bowling leagues anymore? And if they do, not very many, I don't think. But, you know, I know people are starting to go to church more and things like that. And I think the more that we can see each other through our own eyes without a screen in between them, you know, technology is amazing. And I wouldn't have woken up without it, because I couldn't have done the research that helped me to wake up without it. But it is also stripping us of our humanity. And it is, you know, kids who grew up during COVID many of them are really unable to interact in person and have a conversation. So I think that's one of the things I would also say is the more we can get off of our screens, even though I know we need them because that's how we communicate, that's how many of us do our work, all of those things, you know, the better we are. And the more you can have a conversation like I was suggesting and asking questions in person, the better too.
Well, Lisa, I appreciate your time coming here to talk tonight. I would say to everybody that's listening a couple things. One, you can check out Lisa's book, Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites. It's available for sale anywhere where you buy books. Is there a preferred website that you prefer people go to, Lisa, for that?
No, you can go to Amazon. I'm on Barnes and Noble as well.
Yeah, I just didn't want to promote Amazon if that's not where you wanted people to go. Here it is,
No,
everybody. Deprogramming.
you really can't get away from it, honestly. So
Yep. I always like to give guests just the opportunity. Some people want it through their personal website in order, but you can check out Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites, as well as deprogrammingdemocrats.com, which is Lisa's website, to be able to connect directly with her as well. This conversation, you know, while it's kind of a little bit more shocking to see deprogramming Democrats and your leftists, people need to be deprogrammed on the far right as well. This is not a conversation that is ignoring the fact that there is the same programming with the Groyper movement and the crazies that go well into the far right, where they can't even acknowledge when Donald Trump does something wrong. I'm pretty sure none of us here would defend the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments being stripped of people when Americans are taken in by ICE and not offered due process, when they can provide, yes, I'm an American citizen, which has happened to 170 people in this country just within this past year of his presidency. So this is not to not deal in facts or to attack anybody on the left, but rather to say, yes, there is a progressive cult that is completely out there. There is a right cult that's completely out there, and we need love, we need kindness, and we need to start walking people back with facts and reality and care. And so, Lisa, continue to do the great work that you're doing, and we're really glad that you come on with Chris and I so we can have this conversation and hopefully give those tools and tips to individuals. They can read the book and help themselves out. So thank you, Lisa.
it was my pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Lisa.
All right, everybody, we will be back. We got another guest next Thursday for interview night, don't we, Chris Michaels?
We do, but we're going to keep it under wraps.
Okay, well, we'll be on social media, so you can check out who that's going to be. But until then, make sure you follow us everywhere you get your podcast and your social media. At C. Michaels Show, you can check out Chris Michaels. I'm at Real Greg Bolden on X. You can also find us on Facebook, on YouTube, and everywhere you stream podcasts, Spotify, and all the other stuff. We thank you guys for your attention tonight. Please share it with a friend and a loved one and help make this world a little bit more filled with love and with kindness. Have a great night, everybody.